One of the reasons the Marineford War didn't spiral even further out of control was because Shanks stopped Kaido from joining the battle. But what if Shanks failed? What if Kaido actually showed up at Marineford? Well, Luffy, battered and bruised, charged through the war zone with one goal: saving Ace. The execution platform was in sight, and nothing could stop him now. Not even Garp. With help from Mr. Three's wax, Ace's sea-stone cuffs were broken, and he was finally free. The brothers fought their way out, but their escape was cut short by Sakazuki. Provoked into a fight, Ace clashed with the Admiral in a fiery showdown, but the magma's fury was overwhelming. Just as Sakazuki went to strike Luffy, Ace rushed in. But before the fatal blow could land, a thunderous roar echoed overhead. A massive shadow covered the battlefield. An azure dragon wreathed in flames descended. Kaido had arrived. Kaido changed his form in the sky and fell down like a meteor, right in the middle of the battlefield. The impact of his landing sent shockwaves rippling through Marineford. His deep voice boomed out as he called out for Whitebeard, and everyone froze from looking at the huge presence. Their battles were momentarily forgotten in the face of the world's strongest creature. The admirals moved immediately. Kuzan was the first to strike. With a burst of speed, he shot forward, his arms outstretched as an arctic chill spread from his fingertips. Ice bloomed across the battlefield, racing toward Kaido's massive form, threatening to encase the dragon in an impenetrable glacier. The frozen wave surged up Kaido's scales, locking his lower body in ice. For a brief moment, silence hung in the air. Then, a monstrous pulse of Conqueror's haki erupted from Kaido's body. The sheer force shattered the ice instantly, sending razor-sharp shards flying in all directions. Kuzan barely had time to react before Kaido's tail lashed out, moving with the speed of a meteor. The impact sent the Admiral hurtling across the battlefield, crashing through a marine tower that collapsed under the force. Kizaru was the next Admiral to strike at Kaido. He phased into light and came at Kaido with blinding speed. It took him less than a fraction of a second to appear above Kaido's head and drive his kick into it like a hammer. There was a huge explosion of light like a supernova had just detonated, but Kaido barely flinched. He grabbed Kizaru's leg and smashed him down into the ground before transforming his head into a dragon's. A beam of condensed heat and raw power erupted from Kaido's mouth. It tore through the battlefield, engulfing Kizaru in its wake. The Admiral barely managed to react, phasing into light to avoid being incinerated, but the devastation was already done. The beam carved a molten scar through Marineford, obliterating everything in its path and setting the ground on fire. There was only one person who was taking advantage of this situation, and that was Whitebeard. With a thunderous step, Whitebeard closed the distance between him and Sakazuki and stood over him in a rage. The very air around his knuckles distorted as he unleashed his power, and in the next instant, Sakazuki was gone. The sheer force of Whitebeard's punch sent him flying into the depths of Marineford and buried him beneath the stones of Marineford. The very foundation of the island cracked because of the impact of Whitebeard's punch. Seeing Ace, Whitebeard quickly embraced him, his fatherly instincts taking over. He gave Luffy a hug too for helping free Ace. But they weren't out of the woods yet, and the war was far from over. As the dust settled, Kaido stepped forward as his monstrous head shrank back to normal size and carried his club on his shoulder. Kaido locked eyes with Whitebeard with a wide grin. Two monsters stood face to face. Whitebeard's massive frame loomed over the battlefield, his breath steady but heavy. He had gone through way too many injuries during this war, and it was showing. But his eyes did not lose their ferocity. His Basento rested on the ground beside him, his knuckles cracked from the force of his own quake-infused blows. Kaido studied him for a long moment, his golden eyes narrowing and his grin slowly fading. The world's strongest man stood before him, yet something was wrong. His haki, while still huge, looked like it was flickering. The power was there, but Whitebeard seemed older and tired. Kaido clenched his teeth. This wasn't the Whitebeard he wanted to fight. The realization sent a wave of anger surging through Kaido's body. His fists tightened around his kanabo. The thought of Whitebeard losing to the Marines, of being brought to his knees by these so-called warriors of justice, made him extremely angry. He couldn't contain the anger, and with a sudden burst of speed that was unnatural for his size, Kaido lunged forward. His kanabo, wreathed in black lightning, swung through the air like a comet. Whitebeard, despite his wounds, raised his Basento, intercepting the strike. The moment their weapons clashed, the battlefield trembled beneath them. The sheer impact split the very air, sending shockwaves rippling outward. The Conqueror's haki, which erupted like a volcano, caused the clouds to split apart. Nearby, Marines and pirates collapsed instantly, unconscious before they could even understand what had happened. The ground beneath their feet cracked, splintering under the force of two titans. Whitebeard's grip tightened on his Basento as he pushed back against Kaido, but Kaido was relentless because of his rage and kept swinging and swinging. He then aimed a bit lower. Whitebeard barely had time to react before the spiked club crashed against his ribs. The sickening crack of bones echoed across Marineford, but he didn't fall. Whitebeard staggered back and his knees remained locked, but blood dripped from his lips and his breath was ragged. But despite all that, he stood tall and glared at Kaido. Kaido gritted his teeth. He was faster, stronger, fresher, and yet Whitebeard refused to fall. Ace saw all this, and he realized that Whitebeard was simply keeping Kaido at bay. He couldn't watch anymore. Determined, he surged forward, flames roaring to life around his fists. But just as he prepared to join the fight, Whitebeard turned his head slightly, and his look was all it took to completely stop Ace in his tracks. Ace's fists trembled, but he knew that Whitebeard was right. This entire war was for him, and so many people had sacrificed their lives for him. He had to survive to make sure their deaths had some meaning. He had to escape with his brother. His flames flickered as he turned back to Luffy, grabbing his brother's arm. Luffy was reluctant, but he could see the pain in Ace's eyes. Together, they retreated, slipping into the chaos of battle. Whitebeard had made his choice. Now, they had to honor it. Back on the battlefield, Whitebeard's breathing grew heavier. The pain in his body was mounting, his limbs sluggish. Kaido watched him carefully. The mighty pirate, the man who once stood equal to Roger, was reaching his limit. Kaido took a step forward, ready to deliver the final blow, but suddenly he stopped. Something in Whitebeard's stance made him hesitate. Despite everything, despite the wounds, the blood loss, the relentless battle, Whitebeard still refused to kneel. Even at the edge of death, he stood tall and unyielding. Kaido exhaled sharply and took a step back. His anger wasn't going down at all, but he shifted his focus to the Marines who had tried to strike Whitebeard down, and now they would face his wrath. At that moment, a dark figure landed beside him. King, the right hand of Kaido, stood tall, his black wings stretching out behind him, and on the horizon, the looming silhouette of the Beast Pirates' flagship cut through the mist, its crew pouring onto the battlefield. Kaido ordered King to destroy the Marines. Kaido turned his attention toward the admirals. His fingers flexed around his kanabo, his anger finding a new target. Kuzan, now recovered from the earlier exchange, reacted first. A wall of ice shot up, aiming to slow Kaido's advance, but the Dragon Man tore through it effortlessly, shattering it with a single swing of his club. Kizaru appeared above him, beams of light gathering at his fingertips, but Kaido swatted him away like an insect, sending the Admiral spiraling through the air. Then came Kizaru. Kaido's glare locked onto the Admiral, his body radiating with light. As chaos erupted once more, Whitebeard stood alone amidst the storm. His gaze drifted to the sea where his sons were making their escape. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of his lips. But his moment of peace was short-lived as the air behind him shifted. A slow, mocking laugh slithered through the air as an ominous presence emerged from the shadows. Blackbeard. His crew surrounded him, their weapons drawn, their expressions twisted with anticipation. Teach stepped forward, his body exuding an unnatural black mist. His grin widened as he watched the weakened Whitebeard stand alone. A torrent of darkness exploded forward and wrapped all around Whitebeard's body. The old man bashed his Basento into the ground as the gravity-like horse pulled at him, sapping his strength. His Basento fell from his grasp, embedding itself into the ground. Teach moved quickly and slammed a fist covered with darkness into his chest, while everyone else bombarded Whitebeard with attacks. But Whitebeard, even now, refused to fall. He gathered his strength once again with a roar and swung, but Blackbeard was ready. Darkness devoured the attack, neutralizing the Quake's force before it could fully manifest. Another punch followed, then another. The attacks rained down mercilessly, tearing into Whitebeard's body. There was blood everywhere, and Whitebeard's massive form wavered. Blackbeard's laughter echoed across Marineford as he raised his arms in triumph. His darkness expanded, creeping toward the fallen Titan. Then, Blackbeard used his power with a twisted grin, and somehow he took away Whitebeard's power while he was still standing, the light gone from his eyes. The very air trembled as fractures spread across the sky, the lingering echoes of Whitebeard's power now in Blackbeard's grasp. Every pirate, marine, and warlord turned their gaze toward the legend, his titanic frame resting upon the ruins of Marineford. His final breath had passed, but even in death he remained unbroken. Kaido's body stiffened as he saw Whitebeard. He wanted to clash with Whitebeard at his strongest to finally die, but now that chance had been stolen from him. The sight of Blackbeard standing in front of Whitebeard's lifeless body, grinning like a madman, sent a shockwave of pure, unfiltered rage through him. His fingers tightened around his kanabo. His teeth ground against each other. His entire body tensed as an overwhelming surge of bloodlust exploded from within him. Then, with an ear-splitting roar, Kaido transformed. His body expanded, muscles bulging as his hybrid form took shape. His dragon scales gleamed under the fractured sky. His horns elongated and his fangs grew sharper. Electricity crackled around him as black lightning coursed through his kanabo. His presence alone sent tremors through the battlefield, shaking the very foundation of Marineford. With a single step, he vanished. A burst of wind followed in his wake as Kaido reappeared, his kanabo already mid-swing. Jesus Burgess, the first to react, leaped in front of his captain, his muscles flexing as he prepared to block the attack, but he stood absolutely no chance. There was a loud crack as the Thunder Bagua connected, and Burgess's body seemed to warp. His bones shattered immediately, and he was launched across the battlefield like a broken doll. His body skidded across the ruins before crashing into a pile of rubble, unmoving. Kaido didn't even look at him. He was locked onto Blackbeard. Teach barely had time to react as Kaido's next strike bore down on him. Instinctively, Blackbeard thrust his hand forward, releasing a massive shockwave from his newly stolen Gura Gura no Mi. The earth itself quaked as the air fractured, a dome of destructive force expanding outward. Kaido roared and stomped into the ground before pushing forward. His kanabo was smashed against Blackbeard's power. The force was immense, splitting the ground beneath his feet. The Blackbeard pirates leaped into action. Van Augur raised his rifle, aiming for Kaido's exposed flank. Shiryu, now wielding his invisible blade, moved to strike from the shadows. Lafitte and the others circled, preparing to counter. Kaido didn't care at all. With a swing of his kanabo, black lightning erupted around him, knocking Augur's bullet off course and sending the sniper stumbling back. Shiryu's blade met Kaido's arm, but the dragon's scale scales absorbed the impact, leaving only a faint scratch. Blackbeard's grin faltered as Kaido closed the distance again. Panic flickered in his eyes as he activated his Yami Yami no Mi, the darkness surging forward, tendrils latching onto Kaido's body, pulling him in. The gravity forced Kaido's movements to slow, his strength seemingly being sapped away. For a brief second, Blackbeard's confidence returned as his black mist crept over Kaido's frame, drowning him in an abyss of nothingness. Black lightning crackled violently around Kaido's body. His advanced Conqueror's haki exploded outward, tearing through the darkness like a raging storm. The sheer force shattered the Yami Yami's grasp, dispelling the black mist around him. Blackbeard's eyes widened in horror. Before he could react, Kaido's Kanabo crashed into his ribs and made a cataclysmic impact. Teach was sent flying through multiple buildings before he slammed into the remnants of Marine HQ. Dust and rubble erupted into the air as the ground beneath the impact cratered inward. The remaining Blackbeard pirates hesitated, their eyes darting between Kaido and the ruins where their captain had landed. And then suddenly, a new presence arrived. A deep crimson aura spread across Marineford as a crew stepped onto the battlefield. It was none other than the red-haired pirates led by Shanks. His crimson cape billowed behind him, his hand resting on the hilt of Gryphon, and he looked across the battlefield. But the weight of his presence alone was enough to halt every ongoing battle. Kaido turned, his rage-filled eyes locking onto the newcomer. To get everyone's attention, Shanks unleashed his haki. Kaido's grip on his Kanabo tightened, but he didn't move. He knew that this meant the battle had reached its end. Taking advantage of the momentary distraction, the remaining Blackbeard pirates scrambled toward their unconscious captain. Van Augur, barely able to stand, teleported to Blackbeard's side and, with a flicker of his ability, vanished along with him. The rest of the crew followed, escaping Marineford before Kaido could finish what he started. The war was over. Kaido exhaled, his rage still simmering beneath the surface. But he knew there was no point in pursuing them now. His gaze flickered to Whitebeard's lifeless body one last time before turning away. The world had changed. The War of Marineford had finally ended, and the loss to the world was more than it could deal with. Whitebeard was dead, Marineford was in ruins, and the Marines had lost more than just Ace as the balance of power in the world changed so suddenly. But Whitebeard wasn't the only one who had died. Jesus Burgess was one of Blackbeard's earliest and most devoted crewmates, and he had met a brutal end at Kaido's hands. The Beast Pirates had caused absolute chaos on the battlefield, and even Kizaru had been slain. He was supposed to be made of light, but it seemed even light can fade. The Admiral's death sent shockwaves through the ranks of the Marines, shaking the very foundation of their confidence. As for Blackbeard, he had taken Whitebeard's power after landing the final blow on the strongest man alive. He had escaped with his life, and he wasn't too saddened over losing a single comrade and fodder over this. He had emerged from the war stronger than ever, but while the seas were looking to calm themselves, Ace was drowning in his sadness. He had fought so hard, but in the end, his mistakes had him watching his father be killed by the man he hated the most. His mind was full of anger at the world and himself. He had failed because he was weak. He was weak, and he got caught. He was too weak to escape, and in the end, he was too weak to save Whitebeard. That night, as the remnants of Whitebeard's fleet drifted across the sea, Ace stood alone at the edge of the deck, watching the horizon. The sea stretched endlessly before him, yet he had never felt so small. That was when Luffy approached him. His brother had fought tooth and nail to protect him, and looking at him made Ace realize that he needed to become stronger, strong enough to burn away anyone who stood in his way. And one day, when the time was right, he would destroy Blackbeard. It took some convincing, but in the end, Silver's Rayleigh agreed to train Ace and Luffy. On the island of Rusakaina, the two brothers trained harder than they ever had before. The island itself was a brutal teacher, filled with monstrous beasts, unpredictable weather, and no mercy. Ace's flames burned hotter than ever, no longer wild and unrefined. He learned how to condense his fire, to control it with precision, to burn without wasting an ounce of energy. He trained his observation haki to predict movements with deadly accuracy, and his armament haki to strike harder than ever before. But the most important thing he learned was advanced Conqueror's haki. Ace was already incredibly strong, and by training under Rayleigh, he quickly polished himself to a peak he hadn't reached before. A year passed, and Ace had transformed into something far greater than the man who had once charged foolishly after Blackbeard. One night, as a storm raged over Rusakaina, a ship appeared over the horizon, and Ace recognized that Marco was on top of it. Ace greeted Marco, and after a meal, he told everyone that their territory was being taken over by Blackbeard and that they would have to push back if they wanted to stand a chance. They needed to get payback for what Blackbeard had done. Blackbeard had risen too far, too fast. He had taken Whitebeard's powers, his territories, and his throne as an emperor. But the remnants of Whitebeard's crew would not let that stand. They would gather every last one of their allies. Ace didn't hesitate at all, even though Luffy didn't want to send his brother alone. But Ace somehow convinced Luffy that he'd be back because he had one last debt to repay. The two had gotten closer than anyone else after the year they spent together. Just like their childhood, but Ace had to repay the debt he owed to Whitebeard and his crew. He had been given a second chance at life, and he would use it to burn Blackbeard from existence. The New World trembled as the Whitebeard pirates and their allies gathered, preparing for the battle that would determine the fate of their legacy. Their banners flew high, their spirits burned with vengeance, and at their front stood Port Gus D. Ace, his flames roaring brighter than ever. Across Across the seas, Blackbeard awaited them, a twisted grin splitting his face. He had claimed the title of Emperor, taking Whitebeard's throne, his lands, and his power. But he knew the past had come knocking. Marco, Jozu, Vista, and the last warriors of the Whitebeard pirates were coming. And at their lead, the man who should have died in Marineford, the son of Roger, the heir to Whitebeard, the second coming of fire. The battlefield was set. A desolate island in the New World, its skies covered in storm clouds, the air thick with tension. Both fleets arrived, their ships forming an iron wall on the sea. The war began with an earth-shaking clash as cannon fire and hockey-infused blows tore through the battlefield. Ace led the charge, his conqueror's hockey exploding outward, knocking out weaker pirates by the hundreds. His flames surged around him, a living inferno tearing through the battlefield. Marco clashed with Shiryu of the Rain, their battle a whirlwind of talons and steel. Jozu faced Avalo Pizarro, their blows shaking the very ground. Vista dueled against Lafitte, swordplay meeting devilish trickery. But the true battle was set in the heart of the island. Ace stood before Blackbeard, the past looming over them. Blackbeard's grin widened, his body shrouded in the void of the Yami Yami no Mi. He raised his hands, the very gravity of the world bending toward him. Ace's flames roared in defiance, and the battle was so amazing that it looked like the entire sky was shaking. Each attack was a clash of darkness and fire. Blackbeard's Yami Yami no Mi swallowed the flames, pulling Ace toward him. But Ace was not the same man from Bonaro Island. He countered with advanced conqueror's hockey, coating his body with sheer willpower, refusing to be dragged in. His flames became compressed, striking like spears, bypassing the abyss and burning through Teach's defenses. But Blackbeard was no fool. With a grin, he unleashed the power of the Gura Gura no Mi, shattering the ground with a single punch. The very air fractured, the force sending Ace hurtling backward. Ace refused to stay down. He rose, his body battered but his spirit unbroken. His fire burned hotter, brighter, pushing past its limits. The fight dragged on, each blow a titanic clash, but Blackbeard was still stronger. Ace's vision blurred. His body screamed in agony because of how strong Blackbeard was. He had two of the strongest devil fruits the world had ever seen, and now it was getting incredibly difficult for Ace to keep up, despite all the time he had spent training. But then, something inside Ace shifted. His fire began to expand and get hotter. It started becoming blue and turning the ground beneath him to molten glass. His devil fruit had awakened. The battlefield turned into a sun-scorched wasteland. The very clouds in the sky burned away, revealing a crimson sun above the battlefield. Ace stood at its center, his body wreathed in blue flames. His fingers flickered with white-hot embers, capable of incinerating even the strongest hockey. He rushed Teach faster than ever before. His blows now carried the weight of both flame and hockey-infused destruction. Blackbeard screamed as his darkness was burned away, his body charred and broken. For the first time, the great Blackbeard pirate trembled. But Teach was a monster. He endured. He laughed even through the pain. His Yami Yami no Mi suppressing Ace's devil fruit, his Gura Gura no Mi breaking the earth itself. The battle waged on for a long time, and Ace knew that he would be at a disadvantage the longer they fought. Even with his awakening, he was not enough. But Ace had decided that he would repay the debt that Whitebeard left him with and take vengeance on the man who took so much from him. Not just that, he knew that if Blackbeard was left alive, then eventually he would go after his brother too. He refused to let Teach walk away alive. Ace took a deep breath. The flames around him contracted, his aura dimming for just a moment. And then he suddenly ignited and became like a blinding sun. His very life force burned away, his flames reaching a temperature beyond anything seen before. His hair turned to golden fire, his eyes burned like twin stars. The battlefield became daylight, the sky turning from black to blinding white. Blackbeard sweated as he stumbled backward and unleashed both his powers to the extreme. But even his darkness couldn't contain this anymore. Ace's final attack would be his last. He charged, his fists coated in Conqueror's hockey, infused with the last of his existence. He struck Blackbeard dead in the chest and completely erased the middle of his body. The villain screamed as his body was engulfed in pure, unrelenting heat. His flesh peeled away, his bones turned to ash. In a blinding flash of fire, Blackbeard was gone. But as the light began to dim, the remaining Whitebeard pirates realized that he wasn't the only one. Ace looked at them, but the fading light revealed nothing. His grin was all they saw before the light vanished, leaving behind just a pile of ash. Marco collapsed to his knees, staring at the spot where Ace had once stood. Jozu clenched his fists, his diamond form cracking. The crew that had fought so hard, that had come for vengeance, now found themselves in mourning. They had won, but at what cost? The world would soon hear of it. The death of Blackbeard, the vengeance of the Whitebeard pirates. But more than anything, they would hear of Portgas D. Ace, the man who became the sun and burned away the darkness. But Luffy was the first to get the memo. On the same night in Rusakaina, Luffy stood alone, staring at the darkened sky. The jungle around him was silent, the usual sounds of beasts nowhere to be heard. And then a sharp pain stabbed through his chest. Luffy staggered, clutching his shirt. His breathing grew erratic, his instincts screaming at him. His hand, almost trembling, reached into his pocket, pulling out Ace's Viver card. The paper was burning away. His grip tightened, but no matter how much he willed it to stop, the Viver card continued to disintegrate. His brother's life was fading. Rayleigh, watching from afar, saw Luffy's expression change. The moment he had feared had come. Without hesitation, Luffy bolted. He didn't know where and he didn't care where. He just ran as fast as his legs could take him. Rayleigh followed. followed. Knowing there was no stopping him now, days passed, and the world whispered of a great battle, the war between the remnants of Whitebeard's fleet and Blackbeard's crew. The news had spread far and wide of the war that would be known as the Payback War, but Luffy wasn't concerned with that. When he arrived at the funeral, the atmosphere was heavy. The surviving members of the Whitebeard pirates stood solemnly, their faces carved with grief. Marco, Jozu, Vista, and the rest of the crew had gathered on a quiet island, far from the eyes of the world. Ace's grave stood next to Whitebeard's. Two men who had shaped history now rested side by side. Luffy stood before the grave, his straw hat casting a shadow over his eyes. His breath was shaky, his fists clenched so tight they trembled. Marco approached him, his usual carefree expression replaced with one of deep sorrow. He placed a gentle hand on Luffy's shoulder and told him how Ace had avenged their crew and their father. Luffy's grip on his hat tightened, his chest ached. He thought back to everything, their childhood, the laughter, the adventures, the promise to never die. And yet, Luffy took a deep breath and stepped forward, kneeling before Ace's grave. For the longest time, and he said nothing. And then finally, he spoke. He told Ace that he was going to become the king of the pirates. That was his promise to Ace. The wind blew gently, carrying the embers of a dying fire into the sky, and though there was no response, Luffy felt something warm, as if just for a moment Ace had heard him. The fire of the will of D would never go out. Make sure to subscribe and smash the like button for more One Piece videos.